as we have striven after our labors of old. Rest to our souls will be given on the eternal shore. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to run, free from all care and work. Jesus is there, He is the light in the lonely earth. We be a sign, yes, but longing for Thee, that beautiful home of the ransom besides the crystal sea.
Let's pray. Yeah, Father, we come to you this morning. Thank you for all the blessings that you have given to us. Lord, we just thank you for life and for this life that we have in you. We just thank you so much, Lord, for allowing your son Jesus to come down to this cruel earth and die on the old rugged cross for each and every one of us. Lord, we just pray that as we go throughout this service, that everything we do will be done decently in order, and that everything that we do will give you the glory. We just pray as we enter into Bible class that everyone has open hearts, open minds, Lord, to be able to receive your word. Yes, I'll need to say your daughter, son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Yes, youth, please go to the next door to the next class. Thank you.
Yeah, they'll mind or not. Say good morning and welcome. It's good to see each and every one. We welcome all those that are joining us platform online, Zoom and Facebook, and we're trying to get it all together, and we appreciate all those that are working to make this possible. We welcome everyone that's in the audience this morning in person. Good to see some travelers, Brother and Sister Williams, back with us. Today I'm filling in a couple of Sundays for Brother Herschel in the adult class. We want to welcome your participation, your involvement in the study. Brother Herschel's out on vacation. So we just look forward to having a good study in the Lord. Good. Okay. Generally, when I fill in the adult class, I like to go to the Book of Ephesians. And today there won't be any PowerPoint or anything, but again, we welcome your participation here in the auditorium, but also hopefully that those that are watching us online will take part as well. So we'll ask Rhonda and Chris to help us out with that. But I usually like to, in filling in, study from the Book of Ephesians, but today I've chosen a study that maybe not so popular, but I believe that it is relevant, and that is entitled Temptation. Temptation. And so we're taking our study from the text from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 11 through 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 11 through 13. And it reads, "Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he stand take heed, lest he fall. There has no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. So as we looked at the verse there, verse 12 in particular, Paul says, take heed. We talked about temptation. This is definitely not an exhaustive study, but hopefully that, as we said, it will be something that will be relevant. But take heed is what the Apostle Paul writes to the church of Corinth. Take heed to the things that happen with the children of Israel. When we're talking about temptation, and as Paul is writing to the church there, as he gets to this point in the letter that he's writing to them, he's encouraging them about what happened with Israel in the wilderness. And so when we think about what happened with Israel in the wilderness, what a relationship we see between them and God. It says, Paul, it was an example. It's an example to us. As they came out of Egypt, we know the story of how they came out, how they were delivered from Egyptian slavery, how they were delivered from Egyptian bondage. When Moses performed the great wonders, the 10 plagues, to challenge Pharaoh to let Israel go. And finally, that last plague of the death of the firstborn, that the people of Egypt were telling them, just take whatever you want and leave. And a question that I would ask, when we think about the Israelites coming out of Egypt, what would we have been like? When Paul is writing to the church here and he's encouraging Corinth to think about Israel and how they were. Morning. Glad to have y'all this morning. All right. So that's the question that I want to pose. When Paul is talking to the church at Corinth and telling them, okay, this was an example, not a good example. But you need to take heed. What would we have done if we were Israel, delivered from the bondage in that way? Living in a world about 4,000 years ago, their experiences and their situation. How, again, as we talk about it, that things that they went through as they were slaves. How the taskmasters were so very hard on them. And even to the point where that when Moses was in the house of Pharaoh, that as he had that desire to do something about it, it was added to their experience that not only did they have to make the bricks, but they had to get the straw. Just to think about what they went through with that. And the Bible tells us that they cried out to God of the condition and the situation that they were in. So Paul gives us warning as Christians. He says, take heed. Anybody got any input, any comments? As we think about this, because as we think about it, and I didn't really get into as we think about temptation, the word temptation, we see that in the Bible, there seems to be two usages. And I guess in one way that I would put it is like there are temptations that come from without. But then on the other hand, we are tempted from within. We are tempted by the tempter from within to sin. But Paul, again, he warns us as Christians, take heed. So in verse 13, Paul says, when he says, in verse 12, he said, wherefore let him that thinketh he stand take heed, lest he fall. He says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able. But will with the temptation make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. We want to focus on the thought there that what Paul says, there is no temptation taking you, but such as is common to man. What about what Paul says there? There's no, when we talk about temptation, because as Paul is talking to the church, and he's dealing with the church at Corinth on many concerns, many issues as he goes through this letter to them. And so he gets here and he encourages them to take heed and to remember the children of Israel and their example. But he says, as you think about this, about temptation, there has no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. We have anyone to have anything that they want to share on what Paul says there?
I'm going to read the English Standard Version. I think it sheds some more light into it. In that verse 13, it says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So, just wanted to add that in there, that what it was saying was that temptation is not overtaking you, that is not common to man. So the things that they were dealing with were things that were common to men. So they won't let them be tempted above their ability to be able to withstand the temptation that was there. So that the English Standard Translation of it shed a little bit more light into it.
Okay, all right. That's good. All right. Can y'all hear me, Sister Rhonda, all right?
Well, I think I would say that our temptation comes from something that is common to us. You know, we're not gonna, something that we're not used to, we're not gonna be tempted by, you know, like, I'm not gonna be tempted to allow that because that's not what's common to me. But I'm gonna be tempted to allow it because it's common. So he's just saying, you know what, there might be an opportunity for me to lie about something. God is faithful. He will allow, he's already working in me to tell the truth. I have a voice here, I don't have to lie because God is faithful. And with that temptation to lie, he has provided a way for me to tell the truth. That is the Holy Spirit dwelling in me and say, don't do it, don't say that. So I can just say, you know, common things you used to, yes. You know, I've been trying to give up sweet. You know, I don't like chocolate, but when I have a sugar moment, I'll be tempted to eat that chocolate because it's sweet. But it's common to me. But God is making me say, you don't have to eat it. You know, you don't have to do it. So God is faithful to us that things that are coming to us, he's made a way for us to turn it down.
Okay, all right. What were some of their temptations? Adultery.
Worship and idols because they were in captivity.
Okay, worship idols. You know, when God made promise to Abraham, right? I guess he was Abram at that point. That God, as Abram was sojourning, as he was traveling, and God, he'd already made a promise that he was going to bless Abram, right? He was going to make his name greater, that he was going to multiply his offspring. But there was a point that God came and he let Abram look at the land, right? He's like, look at this land. All this land, the Canaan land, he said, I'm going to give it to you, right? Did he get it? Did he actually give it to Abram? It was for his offspring, right? God is telling him, like, you're going to have this land. You know, it's going to be for your offspring. He said, but something was going to happen, right? He said they're going to be a stranger. They're going to be in bondage. They're going to be in Egypt for 400 years. And then when they come here again, then I'm going to give them this land. And God said something about that too at that time. He said something about the land at that time was about the inhabitants of the land, about their condition. What was the condition of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan at that time? Anybody tell me? I think it was brought up over here. There was idolatry, right? There was idolatry. But God told Abram at that time, he said, but the iniquity in the land is not yet full. He said at that right time, you know, when your offspring, your seed is going to be in captivity for 400 years, then they're gonna return here. And I'm saying all that because when God is fulfilling these promises to Abram, that Abram's situation, what was Abram's situation of offsprings? God makes it.
At this time, he had no offspring. Isaac wasn't born. The child was born, wasn't born.
He had no offspring. It was him and Sarah, right? Him and Sarah, they were getting up in age, you know, and they were having trouble, you know, they had a little bit of difficulty kind of understanding that. But as God began to work that, fulfill that, like Sister William brought out with Isaac, we know about Ishmael. Abram and Sarah had their own ideas about how God was going to do that. First, Abram's idea was, well, one born in my household, who was Eliezer, right? Maybe that's the way God is going to fulfill this promise to me. God's like, no, it's going to come from your own loins. So that scheme came up about with Ishmael, all right? And God's like, no, that was a mistake. But God said it's going to be through Sarah, all right? But I'm saying all that because we see God as he's working out his plan. That Isaac is born. Who was born to Isaac? Jacob, all right, his twin brother, right? Jacob and Esau, but Jacob was the fulfill that carried that promise on. All right. And then after Jacob, what happened? Because, and I want us to think about it, that Jacob ended up with how many sons? 12 sons, right? And that's a story within itself to think about how, you see how God is starting to multiply Abram. His seed began to multiply. And with all the sons that Jacob had, he had a particular son, right? One particular son. Anybody? His favorite son. Joseph, right? Joseph. And when we think about the story with Joseph, that there was jealousy. The other brother was jealous of Jacob, his favoritism toward Joseph. And what happened to Joseph? He sold into bondage. He sold into bondage. And as he sold into bondage, and Jacob thinks that he's dead, then we find out what happened with Joseph, that he's sold into bondage, and then his master's wife tried to entice him. He ended up in prison, right? And the story goes on about the dream, but the point that I want to get to is there came a time Pharaoh had a dream. He had interpreted the butler and the baker's dream in prison. The butler, I believe, was restored, and the baker was killed. And Joseph told the butler, like, when you were restored to your place, you remember me. Did he remember him? Not right away. When did he remember him? He remembered him when Pharaoh had a dream, right? He remembered Joseph in prison when Pharaoh had a dream. And the dream that Pharaoh had, the butler was like, well, there was a person in prison, that I was in prison with. And we had these dreams, and he interpreted the dream. And it was fulfilled just like he interpreted, and so then, so Pharaoh calls for Joseph. And anybody tell me the dream that Pharaoh had? It was about the cows, right? The lean cows and the fat cows, and I believe the sheaves that talk about. So it was a dream about how many there were going to be years of famine, but there's going to be years of plenty too. Think about this. That famines. Are there famines today? He said yes. Some places, right? And today we think about, it's been said that with all that's going on, maybe we're going to have a shortage. And I'm saying this because think about how that, so there was a famine. He told Pharaoh there was going to be years of plenty, 7 years of plenty, then there's going to be a famine. And he gave Pharaoh some advice of what to do. Right? So Pharaoh, he told Pharaoh, you prepare for it, put it up, and get ready for the famine. And when those years are good, plenty, they put the grain up, and then when the years of famine came, they had bread in Egypt. So his family, after about 20 years, I believe it was, that they got to a place where they needed bread. And so Jacob sends his sons to Egypt because there was bread in Egypt. Now I went all the way back there because we're talking about when Paul is telling the Corinthians about the temptation of the Israelites. Now, when they find out that Joseph is second in command, Pharaoh has put Joseph in second command, he's put him in charge of all this, and Joseph's brothers come down, and they don't know who Joseph is. They don't know what even has happened to Joseph. They let Jacob, Joseph's father, think that he was dead. And Jacob was grieving all those years because he thought Joseph was dead. But when he finally reveals who he is to his brothers, can anybody tell me what happened from there? Joseph reveals who he is. They were frightened because he did a few tricks with his younger brother Benjamin. They were frightened because it's like, he told them, he started challenging them about their father, and he told them to leave Benjamin there, so they could go back. But in all this, when he finally reveals himself to them, then he tells them to move to Egypt, right? He tells his dad to move down to Egypt. And Pharaoh approves that. What land did they receive? Okay, the land that they call the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen had about 70 family members. Jacob's family. They moved to Goshen. And I mean, even though a family, there's a family. There's food in Egypt. And Pharaoh is welcoming them, and he because of Joseph, he's okay with them. They're different. They have a different belief, different God. But he welcomed these 70 family members down to Egypt during a time of famine. Oh, today, all that we have going on today. We have a lot going on. We got the coronavirus. We got the fires, earthquakes, the fires burning in the West. It's kind of strange that on our continent, that one side a few weeks ago was burning and the other side was flooded. A little while back on the East Coast, they were having storms, they were having floods. The world that we live in, sometimes we don't know what's going to come. We don't know what we will face from day to day. But you think about that. So there they are, the children of Israel. So as the 70 came into Egypt, in time, what began to happen with the Israelites? They began to grow, right? Because that's what God had promised Abraham. They began to grow. So much so that the Egyptians were afraid of them. Is that an unusual thing? That's something.
Is it unusual that they grew, or is it unusual for them to be afraid of them?
Is it unusual for them to be afraid of them?
I don't think it's unusual for them to be afraid of them. I mean, when you start thinking about it, somebody that you have in captivity, and their numbers are starting to grow. And if they get to the point that they outnumber you, then they can overthrow you. So I think it's common for them to be afraid at this point.
Does that go on in the world today? It goes on today, right? Fear.
Before we talk about how to feel, I was thinking that the main point that was shown here, Joseph and his brother, remember they were afraid of him. Because they had been back. But I guess the moral of the story, he forgave them his brother. And I think the scripture says that, but saving it for that, God made it forgive. to see God in the temptation that was upon him. He was tempted to be angry because he spent all those years away from his family and in prison. That with his forgiveness, God was say, you know what, these are your brothers, forgive me. When he saw them, he had to turn away because he cried because these are his brothers that he loved and saw him. And so, I think that was an example of something that is coming, is tempted, so it's tempting for us to be angry with people that do us wrong. So we also should see the lesson in being able to help them.
See God. And I personally, with Joseph, I believe that what Paul is telling us, that the things, just to look at what he went through, the hatred, the jealousy with family. How bearable is that? Sometimes that can be very unbearable, right? And this, do we have an example, an early example of that? When we think about Cain and Abel, that how just in the family you can have these things that are going on. And like Sister Williams said, that Joseph looked at it with God as for good. He didn't have that, he didn't hold that anger in him. And I believe that does relate to what Paul is telling us. It's like, these things are going to come in life. They will happen. Just think about being sold into slavery. Then someone lied on him, right? Someone lied on Joseph. And he was taken from his position in the house of Potiphar and put in prison, left there. Was he upset with the butler? And the butler didn't remember him? He didn't. He didn't have, when the butler finally remembered him, and called for him, Joseph he didn't go up there with a chip on his shoulder like, man, you forgot me. All this time, you left me down there, didn't say a word for me or speak up for me, but he didn't look at that, but he looked at the situation, what he was called for, to address Pharaoh's dream.
Joseph didn't get the word, when his brother saw him, he thought, he went to Potiphar's house. Then he got there, he was enslaved, and he got out, and he was accused, he was out of prison, then he served, then he got the faith of his brother, and he's still there, I'm pretty good, right? I can do great. So, I'm going to let these brothers know how I feel. And sometimes
that temptation, and as we get, I appreciate her taking it back to him as an individual. And where I was carrying it as well as a people, that here they are, when they've gone down as 70 family members, and Joseph is there. And then through the years, they have favor. They're different from the Egyptians, and the Pharaoh gives them the land of Goshen. They have their own place. But as they begin to fulfill God's promise to Abram, that they begin to multiply, then that brings us to that fear, right? And when that fear with the Egyptians got stirred up. So what did the Egyptians decide to do? They wanted some population control, right? They're going to kill all the firstborn male babies, boys of the Hebrews. Start killing them. And then they are enslaved. Whereas before they're in a good place. Think about life. Sometimes I think about this song, you don't ever hear that song anymore. Used to say, riding high at April, shot down in May. Things happen. Sometimes you're going along in life, it seems like things are okay, but things are always happening in life. Things are always, just like we were talking about, the fires, the storms, the virus, now we're dealing with the variant, right? So Paul says there's no such things that are common to man. When she said Joseph was almost like he couldn't catch a break. You know, I'm not going to talk about so-called bad luck. Say bad luck. But the suffering. I guess some of the terms that I would associate with temptation would be trials and suffering and struggles. Do we know anybody dealing with trials? Even just to not think about the coronavirus, but the trials and the struggle just in life. Just in life. But so Paul, as he writes to the church of Corinth, he's saying now, you remember the children of Israel. The children of Israel. How cooperative was the children of Israel coming out of Egypt? Not very good. Sometimes we can be in situations, right? And we're not pleased with our situation. But the solution may be to get out of the situation. But that might not just be our idea, right? That might not be just our idea, you know. Because as Moses was there, when Moses, tell Pharaoh, God said, let my people go. And Moses is fighting against it, and each time things are happening, the children of Israel, they're not just right on board, because when Pharaoh refuses, it creates more problems for them. And so then at the end, it's finally with the death of the firstborn, the Egyptians said, hey, just take what you want. Y'all just go. And the children of Israel, they do go. Where are they going? Do they know where they're going? And as we're talking about temptation, I don't know about defining it. Anybody want to try to define temptation for us? And I say that it's used in two ways in the Bible, but I say there are tests and there are trials. I say that temptation in a sense, it's put it in just very basic terms, is everything. In a sense, temptation is everything. Because this world is just filled with problems and troubles. Like she said just a few minutes ago, or Joseph, like, couldn't catch a break. Sometimes that's the way it is when, you know, it's like one thing goes wrong, then something else goes wrong. Like, man, you know, we appreciate our technology people this morning, and they're stepping up to the challenge. They're stepping up to the challenge and dealing with the things that challenge them, you know. But think about that so they go out, they're right close to the promised land. But God tells Moses, no, don't go that way. Because if you go that way by the way of the Philistines, then the people will look at the Philistines and then they want to go back to Egypt. Sometimes we see obstacles, right? We see things like, wow, man, we left problems. That's the way life is, really. You're dealing with, you know, there's something, as the saying says about storms. You're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or going into a storm. That's the way life is. It's always something for us to deal with. And sometimes we're like, man, things just go smooth. Things just go okay, and not have to deal with those things. God, okay, Brother Kim.
We talk about like defining temptation. I just want to talk about it just on a high level. We talk about temptation. Normally, temptation is something that we want. You know, we think about somebody being tempted with something, about it being something that we want. It's almost like it's tailor-made for you. Because like Sister Williams was talking about that sweet, I may not have that same temptation where sweets may get me. So it wasn't tailor-made for me, but maybe mine is lying. Maybe I can't see a situation where I decide that I don't want to lie. Maybe I see every situation I got to figure out a way to lie about it because it's something that's tempting me and it's tailor-made for me. Satan is watching us. He watches our behaviors and tries to figure out what is it that we're doing that he can tempt us with to take us away from God. So his job is to make it tailor-made to fit us. That's why it seems like it feels right. That's why it seems like, oh, it feels good. Like it's hard to get away from those temptations. That's why I think what you're talking about in 1 Corinthians 10 is so important. We're talking about how faithful God is. So regardless of what you're going through, God is still faithful that we can withstand those temptations no matter how great they may feel to us.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. Okay. And then you kind of went on over to some of the common things of the environment, because we do know that Satan is busy. Satan is the one he knows our weaknesses. He knows what's going on. And he's in that. He's in there, involved in the temptation. And that kind of goes where I would want to go later on. When we look at some of the examples, it's time for us to stop. And just always look at Job. Look at Job there. His life, what was going on in his life. But when the sons of God came before, say everything was say okay with Job. But when the sons of God came before God, Satan came also. So we'll stop right there for now. Next Sunday we'll continue with this study. This time, Ms. Brother Kevin, get us close out.
So as we're waiting for our youth to come back in, I want to thank Brother Steve for an outstanding message, an outstanding Bible class today. Thanks, Sister Bland. She's over on the other side teaching our youth, so appreciate her. Appreciate all of you for joining us in Bible class this morning. Good to have the Williams back with us today. Good to see the Johnsons, good to see our guests out with us today as we study another portion of God's Word. So at this time, I'm going to pause for any repentance or prayers before we go into our morning service. All right, seeing none, we'll do a verse of a hymn and then we will say a prayer. Well, if I don't know if you have one ready, if not, I'll go ahead and throw one out. All right.
He's sweet and low, oh, he's sweet and low. Strong as they run, and strong as they love, but I tell the world wherever I go, that I found a Savior, and He's sweet and low.
Amen. Got one second. Oh. All right, no others who's standing? Let us go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you again, just thank you for your mercy, thank you for your grace. Lord, we just come thank you for us to be able to be here together, to be able to study another portion of your word. We thank you for your servants who have taught our lessons this morning, Lord. We just so thank you for them and their dedication. Lord, we just continue to pray for those who are traveling at this time, that may be on their way here. We just ask that you give them traveling grace. Lord, we just ask that as we go into the furtherance of this service, that you just keep us with these open minds, Lord, to be able to receive your word and to be able to apply them to our everyday lives. We ask all these things in your son, Jesus' name. Amen.